There is a technique in this material that I put off making a whole video about for a long time, because the first time you hear it described plainly, it sounds like something you should not be allowed to do. You go back into a thing that already happened, and you change it. Not your attitude about it, not your interpretation, or your framing, or any of the gentle modern language people use to avoid saying the actual thing. You go back into the event, and you play it again, differently, until the new version is the one you carry. Every serious teacher in this lineage taught some version of it, and almost none of them taught it loudly, because it does not survive a casual hearing. Say it too fast and it sounds like denial. Say it too carefully and it sounds like nothing at all. So it tends to get left out of the beginner material, and people spend years doing the visible half of this work, while the one faculty that would have changed the ground under them sits there unused. That is what we are doing today. Not a trick, a method in 7 parts that runs on the single most powerful and least examined thing you own, which is your ability to remember. And I should tell you at the top where a lot of this comes from, because he is not one of the 4 you usually hear me talk about. Claude Bristol was a hard newspaperman. He served in France in the First World War, worked for the army paper afterwards, and then spent years as a police reporter and a church editor, which is a combination that leaves a man with very few illusions. In 1948, he published a book called The Magic of Believing, written mainly for servicemen coming home and struggling to build anything. It sold more than 1 million copies, and the finding at the center of it is the reason this method works at all. Here is what we are going to walk through. First, why memory is the only category of thought your mind never argues with. Then, how to find the specific old scene that is still spending your money and choosing your relationships. Then the core technique itself, which Neville Goddard called revision, taught properly and step by step. Then how to take that same tool back into the distant past and repeal the one event that set your ceiling. Then how to turn the faculty around and point it forward, which is where the word reverse in the title actually earns itself. Then how to build a memory deliberately, the way Napoleon Hill did every night for years. And finally, the objection everybody hits around day 4. Which is that this feels like lying to yourself. And what the honest answer to that is, 7 keys. Stay to the end for the last one, because if you do not have an answer to it, you will quietly stop doing this within a fortnight. Key 1, the one thing your mind never argues with. Try an experiment. Say out loud right now that you are wealthy. Notice what happened. Something in you answered back. It might have been a full sentence, or it might have been a flinch, but there was a response, and the response was a correction. That is your reasoning mind doing exactly the job it was built for, which is checking claims against the record and rejecting the ones that do not match. Now, try something else. Remember the last time you were embarrassed in front of people? Notice what did not happen. Nothing objected. No part of you said, hang on, let us examine whether that is really true. You simply went there, and your body came with you. And if the memory was strong enough, your face changed while you sat there alone in a room. That gap is the whole video. An affirmation is a claim, and claims get audited. A memory is not a claim. A memory is filed as settled, and the mind treats settled things as the ground it stands on, rather than as propositions to be tested. You do not defend the ground, you just build on it. So the obvious question is whether that filing cabinet can be written to. And the answer, which is uncomfortable, and extremely well established, is that it is being written to constantly by you without your consent. You already know this, though you may never have put it together. Think of an argument you had years ago with somebody who was there. Compare notes. You will find 2 different events. Not 2 interpretations of one event, 2 events with different words in them, sometimes in different rooms. And both of you will be certain. That is not a defect. That is how the thing works. Memory is not a recording that gets played back. It is a reconstruction that gets built again each time you go there, out of fragments and expectations and whatever mood you happen to be in. Which means every time you have replayed that humiliation, you have not been retrieving it. You have been rebuilding it and reinforcing it and quietly editing it toward the version that hurts most. And once you see that, a great deal of failed self-improvement suddenly makes sense. Think about why affirmations disappoint so many people. It is not that the sentence is wrong. It is that a sentence in the present tense about a thing that is not yet so arrives at the desk of a mind whose entire job is to check claims, and it gets checked and it gets rejected every single morning for 11 days until the person quietly stops. They were not weak. They were feeding the wrong department. A memory does not go to that desk at all. It goes straight into the archive, where things are not examined, only referenced. Bristol came at this from the outside, as a reporter rather than a mystic, and his finding was blunt. A picture held in the mind long enough and often enough stops being a picture. It becomes what a man believes. And what a man believes is what he acts on, without further deliberation, all day, in 1,000 small choices he does not notice himself making. He was so uninterested in the mystical framing that his central recommendation is almost comically physical. He told people to stand in front of a mirror and talk to themselves, out loud, with force, until the thing being said stopped feeling like a claim. He had watched salesmen and executives and returning soldiers do it, and had seen what came out the other side, and he wrote it up as mechanics. Repetition, he said, is what turns a thought into a belief, and there is nothing more to it than that. Put those two things together, and you have the entire premise of this method. The mind does not argue with memory, and memory is being written every day anyway. So the only real question is whether you are going to keep letting it be written by accident. Key 2, find the scene that is still running. Before you build anything new, you need to find what is already installed, and it is almost never the thing people expect. I want to be careful here, because this is not a video about trauma, and I am not the person to talk to about that. What I am talking about is smaller and far more common, and in terms of the life you are actually living, probably more expensive. It is a scene, usually short, usually a bit embarrassing to admit, still matters. And you have replayed it enough times that it stopped being a memory and became a rule. Somebody asked you for a price once, and you heard your own voice go up at the end of the number, apologizing for it. You were 19. You have negotiated from a crouch ever since. You put your hand up in a class and got the answer wrong and heard the noise the room made. You have not volunteered an opinion in a meeting in 11 years. Your father looked at something you made and said, "Nothing at all. Not a criticism, just nothing." And you have never once shown anybody your work before it was finished, which means you have been finishing things alone for 2 decades. Notice that none of those are catastrophes. That is precisely why they survive. A catastrophe gets attention and gets processed. A small humiliation just gets filed and then quietly consulted for the rest of your life every time a similar situation comes up. So here is how to find yours, and it takes about 10 minutes with a pen. Take the area of your life that has not moved in years. Money, or work, or the fact that you never ask for anything. Then ask a very specific question, and do not accept the first answer, because the first answer will be a theory. Not why am I like this? That gets you a diagnosis, and a diagnosis is useless. Ask instead, when was the first time I felt exactly this, and what was in the room? Go for the picture, not the explanation. You are looking for a scene with furniture in it, somebody's face, weather, what you were wearing. If what comes back is a sentence about yourself, you have not found it yet. If what comes back is a room, you have, and you will know it when you land on it, because something in your chest will do a small, unpleasant thing. Bodies keep better records than we do. Write it down in 3 lines. What happened, who was there, and the rule you have been obeying ever since. That 3rd line is the important one, and I want you to be brutal about it. Not the feeling, the rule, because you did not just record an event. You extracted a policy from it, and you have been running that policy without review ever since, on the authority of a 19-year-old who did not know anything. There is a quick way to check whether you have found the real one, and it is worth doing before you spend an evening on the wrong scene. Take the rule you wrote and ask where else it shows up. A genuine installed policy is never confined to the area you first noticed it in. If the rule is do not ask for more than you are certain of, you will find it in the invoice, and then you will find it in the restaurant when the wrong dish arrives, and then you will find it in the way you say a bit tired instead of exhausted. It leaks everywhere because it is not a preference about money, it is a setting. If your rule only applies to one narrow situation, keep looking. You have found a habit, not the scene that made it. And one more thing, because people get this backwards. You are not looking for the worst thing that ever happened to you. You are looking for the thing you have replayed the most. Those are very often different, and it is the second one that has been doing the work, because repetition is the mechanism, not severity. Once you have that scene on paper, you have something you can work with. Up to now, it has been running you from a place you could not see. Now it is a specific piece of film, and film can be recut. Key 3, replay it the way it should have gone. This is the technique, and Goddard gave it a name that tells you exactly what it does. He called it revision, and he was very precise about what he meant. Going into the past, he said, and replaying a scene in imagination as it ought to have been played the first time. That is revision. And revision, he said, results in repeal. Repeal is the word to hang on to. Not forgiveness, which is a decision about somebody else. Not acceptance, which leaves the thing in place and asks you to carry it more gracefully. Repeal, the old version stops being the operative one. Here is how it is actually done, in order, and the order matters. Start with today, not with the old scene. Today is easier, the material is fresh, and you need the reps before you touch anything that matters. At the end of the day, before sleep, run the day back. Not analytically, just walk through it, in sequence, the way you would flick through photographs. Morning, the commute, the conversation at 11, lunch, the thing at 4. Find the one scene you would not want repeated. There is almost always exactly one. The reply that came out sharper than you meant. The moment you went quiet when you should have spoken. The way you handled the message from your brother. Now stop and stay with that scene and rebuild it. Not vaguely. You put yourself back in the same room, at the same hour, with the same people, and you play it again the way it should have gone. You said the thing calmly. You held the price. You asked the question. The other person's face does what it would have done if you had. And then, this is the part people skip, and it is the part that works. You stay in the revised version until it feels ordinary, not until you have finished picturing it. Until the new one has the same texture as the old one. That usually takes 2 or 3 passes, and you will feel the moment it settles, because the tightness in your chest that came with the original scene will not be there anymore. Then, sleep. Do not review the day again. The last version you ran is the one that gets filed. Goddard's own instruction was that a person should relive each day as he wished he had lived it, revising the scenes to conform to his ideals. Every day, not as a crisis intervention. As hygiene, the way you clean your teeth, on the ordinary days as well as the bad ones. He gave a small example that shows how mundane he meant it to be. The post brings disappointing news. You do not sit with the disappointment, and you do not pretend it did not arrive. You mentally rewrite the letter, and you read the version you would have wanted to read, and you let that be the one you go to sleep holding. 2 warnings, because both of these will trip you. Do not revise into fantasy. If you were rude to somebody, revise into having been decent, not into having been magnificent. The revision has to be a version you could actually have produced, or the reasoning mind will throw it out and you will have wasted the evening. And do not revise the same scene forever. Once, properly, and then let it go. Going back to it every night for a month is not revision. It is the old habit wearing a new coat, and you will be reinforcing exactly what you meant to repeal. If you want the frame this runs inside, I built a free one. It is a single page called the Daily Auto-Suggestion Sheet. And the reason I mention it here rather than anywhere else is that the bottom half of it is an evening check, which is the exact slot this practice needs and the exact slot most people never build. There is somewhere to note the scene, and there is a reason to sit down at all, which turns out to be most of the battle. It comes with 3 short emails that show you how to run it properly. It is the first link in the description. Take it, put it where you will see it at night, and let us keep going. Key 4, go back and repeal the old one. Now the scene from Key 2, the one with the furniture in it. Wait until you have run the daily version for at least a week. I mean that. People want to go straight to the big one, and it does not work, for the same reason nobody attempts a heavy lift cold. You need the faculty warm. When you are ready, the process is the same, with three differences. The first is that you go in as you are now, not as you were then. This is important, and almost everybody gets it wrong. You are not asking the 19-year-old to have handled it better. He could not. That is why it happened. You are going into the room with what you know now, and you are playing the scene the way it would go if it happened this afternoon. The second is that you play it to the end of the consequence, not just the end of the moment. The old scene did not stop when the room emptied. It continued into everything that followed. So the revision has to as well. You held the price, and then you drove home, and then you told somebody, and then the next week you quoted the same number to the next person because it had worked. Follow it forward far enough that the new version has somewhere to go. The third is that you do it once, and you do it well. Set aside 20 quiet minutes, not in bed with your phone on the pillow, sitting up properly, the way you would treat anything serious. And then here is what to watch for over the following weeks, because it does not announce itself. You will not wake up feeling healed. That is not what happens, and if anybody has told you otherwise, they were selling something. What happens is subtler and much stranger. A situation will come up that would normally have triggered the old policy, and you will notice afterwards that you did not do the thing. You did not apologize for the number, you did not go quiet, and you will not have decided not to. It simply will not have occurred to you. That is what repeal looks like from the inside. Not a feeling, an absence. A door that used to open automatically and now stays shut, and you only notice because you walked past it. Now, the question I get asked every single time, so let us handle it here. What do you do when the other person in the scene was genuinely in the wrong? Because the instinct is that revising it lets them off. That if you go back and play it out differently, you are somehow agreeing that what they did was acceptable, and something in you would rather keep the accurate version and the grievance that comes with it. Here is the honest answer. You are not revising them. You never were. In the revision, you are not making your father kind or your boss fair. You are changing what you did in the room and what you walked out carrying. He can stay exactly as he was. Let him. That is his business, and it always was. And watch what that actually does, because it is the opposite of letting somebody off. The version you have been carrying is one where he acted and you were acted upon. The revised version is one where he acted and you answered. You are not excusing him. You are removing him from the driving seat of a scene he has been steering for 20 years. Shin used to make a related point about grievance, and it is the least sentimental thing in her work. A resentment you are keeping is not stored somewhere else. It is stored in you, and it is costing you rent. And the person it concerns is very often not even aware there is an account open. So the test is not whether he deserves it. The test is whether you want to keep paying for the storage. And I want to say the honest thing about scale here. This does not delete a past. It does not make a hard childhood pleasant. What it does is stop a specific scene from continuing to legislate. And if you have ever watched somebody run a whole adult life off one bad afternoon, you understand that this is not a small thing. Key 5, turn the faculty around. Everything so far has run backwards over things that happened. Now we point the same tool the other way, and this is where the word reverse in the title actually earns its keep. Ordinary planning runs forwards. You stand in today and you look out at the thing you want, and you try to work out the steps between here and there. And it fails constantly for one reason that nobody tells you. From where you are standing, you can only see the routes that exist in your current life. If those routes were sufficient, you would already be there. So you invert it. You do not start at the beginning, you start at the end, and you remember your way back. Here is the practice, and it is genuinely one of the most useful things in this entire body of material. Put yourself at a specific moment after the thing is done. A year out, 2 years, whatever is honest. Not the triumphant moment. An ordinary evening afterwards, when it is old news. Now, from there, you are not planning. You are recalling. Somebody in that scene asks you how it happened, and you tell them. Out loud, if you are alone, in the past tense, in order, the way people actually tell a story. Well, the first thing was that I stopped doing the other work. Then that conversation in the spring, which I nearly did not go to. Then it was quiet for about 4 months, and I honestly thought it had died. Then the thing with the introduction, and then it went quickly. Read that again and notice what your mind did while you were reading it. It filled in. It produced a chain with a shape, including a dead patch in the middle, which is the sort of detail a plan never has and a memory always does. That is the whole mechanism. When you ask your mind to plan, it consults what it knows. When you ask it to remember, it consults what would have to be true, and it will produce material you did not consciously have. Hill called this faculty the sixth sense, and he was careful to say it is not magic and cannot be forced. It is the thing that hands you a solution in the shower after you have stopped grinding at the problem. This practice is a deliberate way of putting a request into it, because a question phrased as a memory is a question your deeper mind will actually answer. 3 rules for doing it well. Tell it to a person, even an imagined one. The mind produces far better material when it thinks it is explaining rather than performing. Include the bad stretch. Every real story has 4 months where nothing happened. Leave it out and you build a fantasy, and you will also panic when the real 4 months arrive. And write down anything specific that appears. Not the story, the specifics. Names, places, a step you had not considered. That is the harvest. You are not doing this for the pleasant feeling. You are doing it because it produces information, and the information usually looks so obvious afterwards that you will assume you already had it. You did not. Let me show you what that harvest actually looks like, because it is small and unglamorous and easy to walk past. A man does this exercise about doubling his income. He sits at the imagined evening 2 years out and tells somebody how it happened. And halfway through the telling, he hears himself say, and of course, the whole thing really started when I went back to the people I had already worked for. He did not plan that sentence. It arrived because the story needed a beginning, and his mind supplied the most plausible one available, which happened to be a list of 40 people who already knew he was good and who he had not spoken to in 3 years. He had not considered them once in 18 months of strategy, because in planning mode, they were filed under old news. That is the whole value. Not a vision, a list of 40 names he already had. Do it once a week, not once a night. This is not the bedtime practice, this is the sit down with a notebook practice, and it needs a bit of room to work in. 15 minutes on a Sunday will do more for you than an hour of planning on a Monday, because on the Monday, you will only be able to see the roads you already know. Key 6, build the room you consult. Now, the far end of this, and the reason I told you at the start that memory can be built deliberately. Napoleon Hill did something for years that he was slightly reluctant to write down, and when he finally did, he surrounded it with so many disclaimers that most readers skim past it. It is the most interesting thing in the book. He chose 9 men whose lives had impressed him: Emerson, Paine, Edison, Darwin, Lincoln, Burbank, Napoleon, Ford, and Carnegie. And every night before sleep, for a long stretch of years, he closed his eyes and held a council meeting with them. He saw the table. He saw where each of them sat. He addressed them one at a time, out loud in his imagination, and he asked them for the specific quality he wanted from each. He was completely clear that he knew they were imaginary. He says so directly. He was not communing with the dead, and he did not claim to be. And then he reports what happened, and this is the part worth sitting with. After enough repetition, the figures at that table began behaving in ways he had not scripted. They developed characteristics he had not assigned them. They said things that surprised him. One of them, he wrote, once turned up uninvited at a moment of crisis and offered something he had not thought of. Now, you can read that mystically if you want. I read it as the plainest possible demonstration of everything in this video. He built a memory. Deliberately, nightly, with detail over years. And a memory built that thoroughly stops being a picture you are holding and becomes a place you can go. He had constructed a functioning faculty out of nothing but repetition and imagination, and then he used it for the rest of his working life to think with. That is not a party trick. That is the ceiling of what this method does. And you can build a much smaller version of it tonight, which I would encourage, because it is the single most enjoyable thing in this whole body of work. Do not take 9, take 3. One person you would want in the room for courage, one for judgment, and one who would tell you the truth without softening it. They can be dead, they can be living, they can be your grandmother. It genuinely does not matter because you are not contacting anybody. You are constructing a room. Then be specific about the room because specificity is what makes a memory rather than a daydream. Decide what the table is made of. Decide where each of them sits and stick to it. Same chairs every night, the way it would be if the thing were real. And bring one question, not your whole life, one actual decision you are stuck on. Ask it out loud in your imagination, to one of them by name, and then, and this is the part that feels absurd until it works, wait for the answer instead of writing it. Let them speak. For the first week, you will feel like you are doing a puppet show, and you will be. Somewhere around the 3rd week, the puppets will start saying things you did not intend, and that is when you will understand what Hill was actually describing. Alex Honnold spent a large part of a year on a route called Free Rider on El Capitan in Yosemite, going up it on ropes over and over. He was not training strength, he was building a memory. Thousands of specific hand and foot placements in sequence rehearsed until he could run the whole climb in his head. He kept notebooks. In the film of it, there is a stretch where he sits by a fire and goes through the moves out loud, one after another, like a man reciting something he already knows. On the 3rd of June, 2017, he climbed it with no rope at all in 3 hours and 56 minutes. He did not improvise a single move of it. He had already done that climb hundreds of times in a place where falling costs nothing. The rope-free version was a recollection with a body attached. Subscribe, by the way, if this is the kind of thing you want more of. This channel is 4 old teachers taken apart carefully, one faculty at a time, and this one is the least understood of the lot. Key 7, when it feels like lying. Around the 4th or 5th night, you will hit this, and I would rather you hit it with an answer already in your hand. You will be sitting there rebuilding a conversation the way it should have gone, and a voice will say, "This is not what happened. You are lying to yourself." And it will feel like the honest adult part of you speaking, which is exactly why it stops people. So let me answer it properly, because the answer is not a slogan. First, you were never storing the truth. That is the assumption inside the objection, and it is simply false. What you have been carrying is already an edit. It was built out of fragments, colored by how you felt that week, and reinforced hundreds of times since by a mind that was rehearsing the painful version because painful versions rehearse themselves. The version you have been protecting as the truth is a construction. You are not choosing between a fact and a fiction. You are choosing between 2 constructions, one of which you built on purpose. Second, notice which way the objection points. Nobody ever feels dishonest when they lie awake, replaying a humiliation and making it slightly worse. That gets called being realistic. The word lying only shows up when the edit is in your favor. That is not a truth instinct. That is a habit with a good vocabulary. Third, and this is the practical one, the test of a revision is not whether it matches the record. It is what comes out of the person carrying it. If the old version has produced 20 years of not asking for things, it is not serving you as truth. It is serving as offense. And if the new one produces a man who states his price without his voice going up, then you may decide for yourself which of the 2 was worth keeping. And there is a sharper version of the objection that deserves its own answer, because a thoughtful person will get to it. Is this not just denial with better branding? No. And the difference is precise enough to state in one line. Denial refuses to look at the thing. Revision looks at it in more detail than you ever have. You cannot revise a scene you will not enter. The whole practice begins by going back into the room, seeing who was there, hearing what was actually said, and feeling what it did to you. That is the opposite of not looking. Somebody in denial cannot tell you what was on the table. You will be able to describe the wallpaper. The other difference is what each one leaves behind. Denial leaves the policy running while pretending the scene never happened, which is why it always leaks out sideways. Revision goes after the policy directly and leaves the scene where it is. One of those is avoidance. The other is maintenance. Bristol is useful here again because he had no patience for any of the metaphysics. His argument was pure cause and effect. The picture you hold repeatedly becomes what you believe. What you believe determines how you act, mostly below the level of conscious decision. And how you act determines what happens to you. He watched it in businessmen and salesmen and returning soldiers, and he wrote it down as mechanics, not mysticism. Which leaves you with one honest question, and it is not, is this true? It is, which version do I want installed? Because a version is getting installed either way. That is the part nobody escapes. You are running this method right now on tonight's material without supervision, and you have been for your whole life. So here is where I will leave you. Tonight, before you sleep, run the day back. Find the one scene. Play it the way it should have gone. And stay in it until it feels ordinary rather than until it feels good. Then sleep and do not open your phone. Do that for a week and then go back and get the old one, the one with the furniture in it, and repeal it properly. And when it starts to work, turn the tool around. Stand at the finished thing and remember your way back to tonight. One last thing before I go. If you have got this far, you have probably noticed something about how this material works, which is that any single technique from it has a shelf life of about 11 days on its own. You do it, it works, you get busy, it goes. That is not a discipline problem. It is what happens to everything practiced alone. The people I have watched actually change over the last few years are almost never the most disciplined ones. They are the ones who stop doing it by themselves. That is the entire reason the Second Life exists as a community rather than as a course you buy and forget. The 4 teachers' work is in there, organized, with a workbook that walks you through it in order. But the part that does the real work is that there are other people in there doing it in the same week as you, and somebody notices when you go quiet. It used to cost a serious one-time fee. We have recently opened the doors so you can begin at no cost, and I do not know how long that stays true. If you have sat through half an hour on how to edit your own memory, I would guess it is for you. That is the second link down. And whatever you decide about that, do the practice tonight. It costs you 4 minutes and one honest look at a day you were going to sleep through anyway.